The Aspen Mountains are a beautiful, brutal prison of snow. He was Marcus Thorne, a tech mogul blinded by wealth and the elegant facade of his wife, Vespertine. But she didn't want him. She wanted his $50 million fortune. Driven by ruthless greed, she led his small, disabled son, Caspian, to the edge of the Devil's Ridge overlook, a precipice of ice and death. Her crime was just seconds from being complete when a desperate bark sliced through the silent snow. A canine officer and her loyal dog raced against time to save the boy from the final, fatal push. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. The sun over Aspen, Colorado, was a cold, indifferent eye in the pale winter sky, its light sharp but weak against the vast white expanse. The air was frigid, thick with the scent of pine and fresh powder, the kind of stillness that precedes a heavy snowfall. The Thorne family estate, an imposing structure of dark timber and glass that dominated a secluded mountainside above the roaring Fork Valley, felt less like a home and more like an opulent prison carved into the harsh landscape. Its isolation, often prized by the ultra-wealthy, now amplified the chilling tension brewing within its heated walls. Marcus Thorne, a man who had forged his career in the unforgiving crucible of the tech industry, stood rigidly by the panoramic window, watching the slow, swirling flakes of early winter snow begin to descend. His 45 years were etched primarily around his eyes, deep, focused wells of weariness that rarely surrendered control. He was tall, with the lean, taut build of a man who demanded discipline from his body as much as his boardroom. His dark beard, precisely trimmed along a strong, squared jaw, was neatly salted with silver at the temples, a silent testament to the stress of building a billion-dollar empire. Today, dressed in the corporate armor of a charcoal suit and a perfectly knotted silk tie, Marcus radiated frustration. He was being pulled away by a severe cyber crisis in his company's Asian division, a crisis demanding his physical presence immediately, despite the worsening mountain weather. 3 days, Vespertine. Only 3 days, and I need this house to run like clockwork. The roads are getting slick. No disruptions for Caspian. His routine is paramount, Marcus insisted, his voice a low, hard vibration that filled the sterile space. He was speaking to his wife, but his gaze was fixed on the desolate white landscape, unable to meet the manufactured calm he knew he would find on her face. Vespertine Thorne, 34, glided into his line of sight. She possessed the startling, almost artificial beauty of a woman carved from ice and ambition. Her slender, athletic figure was showcased by a cream-colored cashmere sheath dress and discreet diamond studs, an outfit that spoke of effortless, expensive winter elegance. Her hair, the deep, polished brown of rich mahogany, fell in sculpted waves, framing high cheekbones and hazel eyes that, despite her practiced warmth, always retained a distant, assessing quality. As the public face of a prominent local youth charity, Vespertine had mastered the art of performative empathy. Yet, her smooth, elegant demeanor was currently underpinned by a flicker of strained desperation, evident only in the slight tightening of the skin around her mouth. "Darling, I am perfectly capable of supervising a small child for 72 hours. He is my son," Vespertine replied, her tone a smooth, melodious contralto, laced with a subtle hint of injury that was purely strategic. She moved to the enormous kitchen island, picking up her phone with fingers that betrayed a nervous energy, turning the device over and over. The nanny is fully briefed on his therapy and diet. The storm warnings are only light. Just go and secure our future, Marcus. We will be here, safe and waiting. The subject of their immediate concern, Caspian, was seated on the edge of a custom-designed ottoman, dwarfed by the scale of the room. 6 years old, he was an island of stillness in the chaos of adult anxiety. His body was small and slight, his left leg encased from knee to ankle in the stark black of a lightweight carbon fiber brace, an unwelcome legacy of a difficult birth and subsequent trauma. He navigated the world with the deliberate, slow patience of someone who had learned early to calculate every risk. His light brown hair fell across a pale forehead, highlighting his large, solemn gray eyes. Eyes that watched the world with the unblinking intensity of a seasoned observer. He clutched an aluminum crutch, his only mobility aid, Resting his magnificent head across Caspian's braced thigh was Shadow, a 6-year-old Belgian Malinois. He was not merely a pet, but a living extension of Caspian's defense mechanism, a highly trained service and protection dog. Shadow's compact, powerful body was sheathed in a short, thick coat of sable and black. His amber eyes, sharp and intelligent, were fixed in an unblinking, low-level surveillance of the room, his entire posture radiating a controlled, quiet strength. The dog's breath misted slightly in the air before the large window. "I have my drawings, Dad," Caspian whispered, his voice thin but clear, not lifting his gaze from the sketchpad where he was painstakingly detailing the schematics of a fictitious snowmobile. "And Shadow is here." Marcus dropped into his rigid posture instantly, kneeling down in a rush of concern that wrinkled his expensive trousers. He looked directly into his son's serious eyes. "My brave man, listen to me. I'm only 3 days away. We will talk every single night, and you trust Shadow, always. If you feel uneasy about anything at all, you tell him, and you call me, no matter what Vespertine says about the time difference." Caspian met his father's eyes then, a fragile nod passing between them. Shadow lifted his head and offered a focused, almost clinical lick to Caspian's hand, a silent vow of protection. With a final, desperate hug, Marcus straightened, his face resetting into its corporate mask. He spared one final distracted glance at Vespertine. "Remember the quarterly review for the main trust, Vespertine? The documents must be secure, no exceptions." "It's all secure, Marcus. Now go. The jet won't wait for the snow," she urged, giving him a quick, dismissive peck on the cheek. Her fingers lingered on the cuff of his shirt, a gesture of ownership rather than affection. The heavy thud of the SUV's door signaled Marcus's departure. The vehicle, specially equipped with snow tires, crunched over the fresh powder as it began its long descent down the treacherous mountain road. The moment the taillights disappeared, the air in the house changed. The beautiful mask on Vespertine's face shattered. Her eyes narrowed, losing all trace of their manufactured softness, and her entire body seemed to deflate with sudden, raw panic. "Downstairs, dog! Now!" she snapped, her voice stripped of its honeyed modulation, directed at the dog. Shadow, without moving a muscle, subtly lowered his massive head and emitted a low, continuous rumble deep in his chest, a vibration of defiance. The boy, who was already maneuvering his crutch toward his room, placed his small, pale hand on the dog's shoulder. "Come on, boy, it's better upstairs," Caspian murmured, his movement steadying the dog. Shadow, ever loyal to his primary, turned and followed the boy, his gaze a final, cold dart at the woman who now paced the marble floor. Vespertine ignored them, moving like a predator to the secluded counter where her phone was now vibrating aggressively. The caller ID simply displayed, "Victor." She snatched the phone, her breathing ragged, the delicate skin on her neck straining. "The window is short, Vespertine. The transfer must be initiated, and the insurance claim is the only immediate liquidity. We are exposed on all fronts." Victor's voice, a low, rasping threat, issued from the speaker. "I know. I told you. The $50 million policy requires an event to be triggered, a sudden, tragic accident that bypasses the legal scrutiny of the trustees. I can't simply withdraw the funds. I need time to move the primary trust assets. This is the only way to cover the $15 million shortfall by the end of the week," Vespertine hissed, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles shone white. Her ambition had led her to divert funds from the Caspian Thorn Trust into disastrous speculative ventures, and now the sharks were circling. Victor's voice dropped lower, colder. "Then make the event happen. Do it cleanly. Do it today. Fail. And I not only expose your embezzlement to Marcus, I collect on my debt by other means." The line went dead with a definitive, chilling click. Vespertine remained frozen, staring at the phone, the color draining from her face. 50 million. The debt was suffocating, and the trust, the vast, inaccessible trust, was the only escape. Her eyes lifted, scanning the horizon. Her gaze finally rested on the distant, perilous silhouette of the Devil's Ridge Overlook, a cliff edge known for its deceptive beauty and sudden, massive snow cornices, a place perfect for a fatal winter slip. A chillingly cold calculation settled over her face, replacing panic with terrifying resolve. "Caspian," she whispered to the empty, echoing room, a sweetness returning to her tone that was far more dangerous than her anger. "Time for a walk." The morning after Marcus's hasty departure, the air inside the Thorn mansion was thin and unnaturally quiet, broken only by the distant rhythmic ticking of the home's sophisticated climate control system fighting the mountain cold. Outside, a fresh blanket of snow had fallen, muffling the world and turning the steep slopes of Aspen into a pristine, white death trap. The sky was a uniform sheet of steel gray, promising more snow. Vespertine did not rush. She moved with a calculated, surgical patience, her anxiety from the previous night replaced by a chilling, focused intent. She wore an expensive tailored snowsuit, black with silver hardware, and shearling-lined black leather boots, projecting an image of effortless mountain chic. Her mission required absolute precision, making the accident appear utterly convincing. She had already dismissed the cleaning staff for the day, citing a private family emergency, ensuring the mansion was empty except for them. Caspian, seated at the breakfast nook, picked lethargically at his dry toast. He could feel the change in the atmosphere. The sudden, intense sweetness of Vespertine's manner was more disturbing than her usual detached coldness. "Caspian, darling, today is a beautiful day for an adventure, don't you think?" Vespertine purred, leaning close, her perfume, expensive and sharp, overwhelming the faint scent of toast. "Your father would want you to enjoy the fresh snow. We're going to the Devil's Ridge Overlook." Caspian's small face paled. "But Dad said I can't go to the ridge. It's too slippery, and the therapist said I need level ground." "Nonsense. Your father is being overly cautious," Vespertine dismissed, waving a manicured hand. "It's about strengthening your resolve, sweetheart. And I have something marvelous to show you up there. A surprise." She smiled, her hazel eyes reflecting nothing but the cold glass of the window. In the corner, Shido the Malinois, who had been resting, rose instantly. He lowered his massive head and let out a single, deep-throated growl, a sound that was less a bark and more a vibration of pure professional alarm. He was immediately positioned between the boy and the exit door. "Stop that brute!" Vespertine hissed, her voice cutting through the space. "He's not coming. He'll track snow through my new boots." "He has to come," Caspian insisted, clinging to his crutch. "He's my mobility aid. He helps me balance on the ice." Vespertine's composure fractured momentarily. She knew Marcus had been explicit. Shadow was non-negotiable. "Fine, but he stays on the lead, and he walks behind me, understand?" She wrestled a heavy, bright red sled from the utility closet and pushed it towards Caspian. "You carry this. It's too heavy for me to pull up the slope." The lie was transparent. The sled was an attempt to justify why a disabled child was navigating treacherous terrain. He was merely playing, and she was, supposedly, supervising. Meanwhile, 10 miles away, the mountain roads were turning treacherous. Officer Elena Rossi, 35, was a woman built for the extremes of the high mountains. She was of medium height, powerfully framed, with the defined muscle tone of a dedicated athlete, and carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who had faced down blizzards and desperation. Her uniform was the practical, layered gear of the mountain patrol, thick thermal pants tucked into waterproof boots, and a reflective rescue jacket zipped high, framing a sharp, determined face. Her dark auburn hair was pulled back tightly, emphasizing a scattering of freckles and clear, intelligent green eyes that missed nothing. Rossi had grown up in rural Wyoming, learning early that survival depended on respecting the mountains, a lesson she never forgot. She currently patrolled the mountain passes with her canine partner. Her partner was canine Sarge, a 6-year-old golden retriever mixed with Malinois. Sarge was an unusual combination. He had the Malinois' intense drive and lean, powerful frame, but the retriever's dense golden coat and broader, friendlier muzzle, making him excellent for both search and rescue and community relations. His temperament was stable, but his instinct for danger was sharp. Today, Sarge was working, his senses hyper-alert to the shifting scents of the approaching snowstorm. "Sarge, take it easy, buddy. I know you smell the next front coming in," Rossi murmured, patting his head as he strained against the lead near the patrol SUV. She was specifically tasked with patrolling the less frequented higher passes, areas prone to sudden slides and dangerous cornices, including the Devil's Ridge Overlook, notorious for its hidden dangers, particularly this early in the season, before the main patrol routes were secured. Rossi received a crackling message over her radio, confirming the road closures due to heavy snowfall. She sighed, adjusting her thick leather gloves. Her route was now critical, the only open path to check on isolated properties. "Looks like it's just us, old man," she told Sarge. The dog responded with a soft, focused woof and resumed his methodical tracking, his broad paws crunching rhythmically in the fresh powder. Back at the Thorn estate, Vespertine's plan was underway. She struggled to keep up with Caspian, whose crutch, despite his limitations, allowed him to move with surprising disciplined speed. Shadow, walking dutifully behind them on a short lead, kept his gaze on the boy, but his ears were constantly flicking, absorbing every shift in the mountain air and every nuance in Vespertine's hurried breathing. As they ascended the narrow, snow-covered path leading to the Devil's Ridge, the landscape grew more menacing. The trail narrowed drastically, dropping off sharply on one side into a deep, forested ravine. Caspian, burdened by the bright red sled, began to tire, his breath coming in, ragged, short gasps. The carbon fiber brace rubbed uncomfortably against his thin leg. "I can't, Vespertine. My leg hurts," Caspian pleaded, stopping abruptly, his small body trembling from effort and cold. Vespertine stopped, her face contorted in a brief flash of pure impatience that quickly vanished into her saccharine mask. "Almost there, sweetheart. Just a little further. Look." She pointed ahead, towards a narrow, icy outcropping of rock that jutted over the cliff edge, the Devil's Ridge overlook. "It's the most beautiful view in all of Aspen. We have to see it before the big storm hits. Just a few steps more." Caspian looked up at her, sensing the lie, but seeing no escape. The fear, cold and sharp, replaced the exhaustion in his chest. Shadow, sensing the boy's distress, pulled sharply on his lead, trying to nudge Caspian back down the path. Vespertine yanked the dog's lead hard, silencing him. She leaned down to Caspian, her voice becoming a strained whisper, devoid of all pretense. "Your father left me, Caspian. He left us. And you have to understand that sometimes, when people leave, they leave us destitute. But a good son always helps his mother. Now, let's go get that beautiful view." Her hand, encased in the elegant black leather glove, reached out and gripped the aluminum frame of Caspian's crutch, steadying him, and propelling him forward. Meanwhile, Officer Rossi and Canine Sarge were completing their mandatory perimeter check below the ridge. Sarge, usually calm and methodical in his tracking, suddenly stopped mid-step. His body went rigid, his tail, previously loose, froze straight. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flared, and then he let out a sharp, immediate whine, a sound Rossi knew was reserved only for detecting human distress or the absolute scent of fear. Rossi pulled up short, scanning the thick woods and the heavy snow. "What is it, Sarge? Bear? Elk?" Sarge didn't bark, but he turned his head sharply upward, toward the concealed winding path leading to the Devil's Ridge overlook, his golden coat bristling. He didn't just smell fear, he smelled a specific sharp adrenaline rush, overlaid with the metallic scent of expensive perfume, a combination that was deeply out of place in the desolate mountain silence. The dog strained against his harness, pulling Rossi towards the treacherous upward trail, his focus absolute. Rossi checked her sidearm, her green eyes narrowing, realizing that the silence of the mountain had just been broken. The treacherous ascent to the Devil's Ridge overlook was almost complete. The path had deteriorated into a narrow, winding ledge, covered by a deceptive layer of fresh powder over slick, deadly ice. The wind, cutting and relentless, whistled through the jagged pines, carrying a sound like a low moan. Caspian's legs were burning, not just from the exertion of navigating the steep incline with his crutch and brace, but from the raw, cold fear that had solidified in his gut. The bright red sled, a mocking symbol of fun, dragged heavily against his small frame. Vespertine, her breath coming in shallow, expensive gasps beneath her tailored black snowsuit, finally stopped at the summit, a precipitous rock outcropping covered by a fragile, overhanging snow cornice. The drop on the far side was sheer, invisible under the swirling snow, disappearing into the white void of the mountainside. "See, Caspian? You made it. You are so strong," Vespertine cooed, her voice strained with triumph and something darker. She glanced at the red sled. It lay perfectly, justifying the entire excursion. The illusion of a tragic skiing accident was now complete. Caspian looked not at the view, but at the sheer instability of the ground beneath his feet. "Vespertine, please. We need to go back. The ground is breaking." Shadow, the 6-year-old Belgian Malinois, who had endured the journey on a lead tightly controlled by Vespertine, confirmed the danger. He planted his 4 paws wide on the rock, refusing to move another inch toward the cornice. He let out a deep, resonant rumble of warning, not aimed at the boy, but at the woman holding his leash. "Be quiet, you useless beast!" Vespertine hissed, yanking the lead savagely. She shoved the dog backward, but Shadow, despite the sudden shock, held his position, his amber eyes fixed on the boy with unwavering concentration. Vespertine stepped towards Caspian, her face losing its saccharine veneer completely. The handsome features hardened into a mask of pure, desperate greed. "You know, I married your father for security, Caspian, not for this, not for a boy who drags his feet and costs millions in therapy and specialized care. You were supposed to be my access, not my anchor." She reached out, not to comfort, but to grasp the cold aluminum of Caspian's crutch. "But now, you are going to be my salvation. Your father, in his infinite wisdom, insured your fragile life for $50 million. An accidental death on a treacherous mountain path? Untouchable. It's the key that unlocks the rest of the Thorn Trust, Caspian, and I need it now." Caspian gasped, not fully understanding the financial terms, but comprehending the naked malice in her voice. He tried to pull back, his fear lending him a fleeting burst of strength, but Vespertine was stronger. She used the crutch itself, his mobility and support, as a lever, brutally forcing his braced leg forward onto the thin, icy shelf of the overhang. "Say, goodbye to Aspen, sweetheart," she snarled, her breath steaming in the sub-zero air. She placed one elegant, black-gloved hand on his tiny shoulder and prepared to deliver the final, brutal push. Below the ridge, the ascent for Officer Elena Rossi and K9 Sarge was brutally fast. Sarge, the golden retriever Malinois mix, was now straining furiously against his harness, ignoring Rossi's commands for caution. The distress signal he was receiving was overriding his training. Rossi, despite her mountain strength, struggled to keep pace with the driven animal. "Easy, Sarge! Hold!" Rossi called out, her voice tight with effort. She dug the spikes of her heavy waterproof boots into the packed snow. She had never known Sarge to behave with such urgency. This wasn't an animal trapped. This was acute, immediate human danger. They rounded a final, thick cluster of pines. The scene exploded into terrifying clarity. The woman in the black snowsuit, the small, desperate boy teetering precariously on the precipice, and the large Malinois dog below them, straining and silenced. Rossi's mind instantly processed the visual, a classic domestic disturbance, but 1 second away from becoming a fatal fall. She reached instinctively for the radio on her shoulder, but knew she didn't have time. At that exact frozen moment, just as Vespertine's hand tensed for the fatal shove, Shadow found his voice. Breaking free of Vespertine's grip with a sudden, powerful wrench that yanked the lead from her glove, he surged forward. He didn't bark the usual warning. Instead, he let loose an ear-splitting, primal howl, a desperate, raw sound that echoed off the white mountainside, a sound of absolute terror and failure. He launched himself against the woman's legs, not with a bite, but a powerful, disruptive shove, hoping only to spoil her balance. The sudden, physical assault broke Vespertine's concentration. She shrieked, stumbling backwards. The shove was enough to save Caspian, but the sudden movement caused her to lose her grip entirely on the crutch. The aluminum crutch slipped from her grasp and clattered sickeningly across the ice, disappearing over the edge into the abyss. Caspian, deprived suddenly of his anchor, lost his balance and fell, but fell backward, away from the deadly drop, tumbling onto the rock platform, striking his already braced leg. He cried out, a small, choked sound of pure pain and panic. Vespertine, recovering her footing, looked down at the boy with venomous hatred, but before she could move, a new, sharp sound sliced through the howling wind. "Police! Freeze!" Officer Rossi stood framed in the narrow entry to the summit, her face grim, her gun drawn and pointed directly at the woman. Her mountain gear and reflective jacket made her an imposing figure against the gray sky. Sarge, the K9 officer, exploded forward. He did not charge the woman. Instead, he raced to the boy, positioning his body protectively over Caspian, letting out a series of low, deep growls directed solely at Vespertine. Vespertine, momentarily paralyzed by the sight of the gun and the arrival of official authority, tried desperately to regain her composure. She threw her hands up, the movement exaggerated and theatrical. "Officer, thank God! It was an accident! He slipped on the ice. I tried to catch him. That dog attacked me!" she cried out, her voice shifting instantly to the smooth, practiced plea of the victim. Rossi ignored the performance. Her gaze was locked onto the scene, the tearful, injured boy, the defiant Malinois protecting him, the lost crutch, and the sheer drop behind the poised woman. More tellingly, she saw the discarded red sled lying neatly on the ground, clearly untouched by any slip. "Hands behind your head, ma'am. Slowly. Now," Rossi commanded, her voice calm and absolute, the practiced calm of someone who rarely gives a warning twice. She kept her weapon trained on Vespertine, simultaneously maneuvering her radio with her left hand, her glove clicking the transmit button. "Control, this is 7 Alpha 2. I have a situation at Devil's Ridge Overlook. Need immediate backup and medical transport. Possible attempted assault. Code 3. Vespertine's face finally lost its battle with the mask. A flicker of pure animal terror crossed her features as the reality of her exposure set in. She opened her mouth to argue, but Rossi took a step closer, the mountain air filling with the metallic click of the safety being taken off the officer's weapon. "Do not test me on this mountain, ma'am," Rossi warned, her eyes unyielding. "I saw enough." Vespertine complied, slowly raising her hands, her elegant black gloves a stark contrast against the gray winter sky, marking her surrender. Caspian lay injured, safe beneath the warm, heavy weight of shadow and the immediate, powerful presence of the police. The journey down the mountain was a brutal descent into reality. Caspian, bundled securely in an emergency thermal blanket, was transported by the mountain rescue team's specialized snowmobile, Shadow pressed protectively against the edge of the stretcher, his breathing fast and shallow. Officer Elena Rossi followed the rescue crew, driving her canine SUV with grim focus, the flashing blue and red lights casting distorted, anxious colors across the fresh powder. Vespertine, stripped of her expensive gloves and snowsuit jacket, sat restrained in the back seat of a separate patrol car, her smooth veneer finally shattered, replaced by a sullen, calculating silence. At Aspen Valley Hospital, the air was thick with the sterile scent of antiseptic and panic. Caspian was quickly whisked into the emergency room. He was conscious but pale, suffering from hypothermia, a mild concussion, and a severe spiral fracture to his braced left leg. The impact of the fall onto the rigid brace saving his life but compounding the existing trauma. Shadow, after a brief, tense exchange with hospital security, was permitted to stay in the corner of the waiting room, an exception granted by the attending physician who witnessed the dog's unyielding devotion to the boy. Marcus Thorne arrived from his chartered jet, which had landed at Sardi Field moments before the runway was closed by the storm. He was a figure of cold, controlled fury, his charcoal suit rumpled, his face a landscape of shock and exhaustion. He moved with the focused, terrible energy of a man whose entire worldview had just collapsed. The police detective on duty was Detective Roy Jenkins, a man in his late 50s with the permanent, weary slump of someone who had seen too much small-town deceit dressed in high-dollar fashion. Jenkins was burly, with a thick neck, a perpetually unbuttoned plaid shirt beneath his regulation jacket, and a salt-and-pepper mustache that drooped slightly over his mouth, giving him a perpetual look of skepticism. He greeted Marcus with a professional, curt nod. "Mr. Thorne, we have your son stabilized. Officer Rossi's statement is being finalized. You need to come down to the station," Jenkins stated, his voice flat and non-committal. Marcus barely registered the words. He knelt by Shadow, burying his face in the Malinois' thick sable fur. "She tried to kill him, Shadow. She tried to kill him." Shadow whined low, pressing his head into Marcus's shoulder, offering the only unjudging comfort available. The interrogation room at the Aspen police station was small, gray, and smelled faintly of stale coffee. Vespertine sat across from Detective Jenkins, her posture still attempting elegance despite the chill of the handcuffs and the cheap wool blanket draped over her shoulders. Jenkins watched her through the one-way glass, adjusting his drooping mustache. "Let's review, Mrs. Thorne," Jenkins began, his voice slow and deliberate, laying out the timeline. "Your husband leaves. You dismiss the staff. You force a 6-year-old child with severe mobility issues to climb an unstable, restricted area, the Devil's Ridge Overlook, in a snowstorm, carrying a sled as a prop. And moments later, an armed officer observes you, using his crutch as a lever to force him toward a 100-foot drop. Does accident still sound like the most appropriate term, Mrs. Thorne?" Vespertine maintained her facade of righteous indignation, though her eyes flickered with raw fear. "It's a misunderstanding. That boy is difficult. He was hysterical, demanding we go further. I was simply trying to stabilize him, officer. And that animal, that vicious dog, attacked me, causing me to lose control. Marcus will vouch for me. I am the director of a charity, for God's sake. Jenkins allowed a brief, silent moment to hang in the air, then slid a folder across the table. We have the security footage from your home, Mrs. Thorne. Footage that shows you on the phone with an individual named Victor discussing a $15 million shortfall and a trigger event for a $50 million life insurance policy. We also have a statement from Officer Rossi confirming she saw you apply force to the boy's crutch. The mention of the numbers, $15 million, $50 million, finally broke her. Her composure shattered, replaced by rapid, shallow breathing. That policy was meant to protect the trust. I needed liquidity. Marcus would have understood, she stammered, the words tumbling out in a desperate, tangled confession of financial panic and greed. Jenkins leaned back, the silence of the room swallowing her futile arguments. Meanwhile, in the makeshift company communication room Marcus had commandeered at the station, he was no longer worried about the Asian market crisis. He was systematically dismantling the last 3 years of his life. He sat before his encrypted laptop, his fingers flying across the keys, tracking the hidden financial threads Vespertine had woven. Marcus was looking for the $15 million shortfall Jenkins had mentioned. What he found was far worse. He discovered a series of complex, unauthorized wire transfers executed over the last 6 months, systematically draining assets from the Caspian Thorne family trust, the primary financial safeguard he had established for his son after the death of Caspian's birth mother, Liliana. The embezzled amount wasn't $15 million. That was just the immediate debt. The total missing was closer to $60 million, diverted into high-risk offshore shell corporations. The final devastating discovery was contained within a highly restricted, encrypted folder under Vespertine's personal directory. It was a digital copy of the Caspian Thorne Trust Addendum, a document Marcus vaguely remembered signing 2 years prior when Vespertine had convinced him to streamline the trust's administrative oversight. The new language, buried deep in the legal jargon, stipulated that in the event of Caspian's passing, the majority of the trust's assets, excluding the insurance payout, which went to the policy beneficiary, Vespertine, would be automatically allocated to a charitable acquisition fund controlled entirely by Vespertine Thorne's foundation. She hadn't just wanted the insurance money, she had intended to destroy the boy and then legally seize his entire generational wealth. The betrayal was absolute, cold, and meticulously planned. It was not a crime of passion. It was a corporate hostile takeover directed at his own son. Marcus leaned back in the chair, the cold steel of the desk pressing into his spine. He closed his eyes, his mind replaying every smooth word, every elegant gesture, every feigned concern. He hadn't just been blinded by beauty. He had been architecturally dismantled by the woman he had sworn to love and trust. The humiliation and self-reproach were staggering. He had failed Liliana, and he had nearly lost his son to his own fatal, arrogant oversight. He opened his eyes, now devoid of weariness, replaced instead by a singular, focused intensity. He printed the documents, stacking the proof of Vespertine's comprehensive betrayal on the desk. He stood, his decision clear. He would not just file charges. He would destroy every asset and every public image Vespertine had ever constructed. He would file for a public, aggressive divorce. First, however, he had to see his son. He paused only to make 2 urgent calls, one to his legal team in New York and one to his private security team. The house on the mountain was no longer a home. It was a crime scene. He needed to get Caspian and Shadow out of Aspen forever. The frigid clinical silence of the private wing at Aspen Valley Hospital offered no solace to Marcus Thorne. It was 3 days after the attempted assault, and the media had descended upon the Thorne estate like vultures, turning the beautiful mountain home into a tableau of betrayal and crime. Vespertine had been moved to a high-security detention center in Denver, facing a stack of charges ranging from attempted murder to grand larceny and complex financial fraud. Marcus, however, felt no victory, only the hollow, sickening dread of a father who had outsourced his son's protection to a predator. Caspian, pale but stable, lay in his sterile white bed. The fractured leg, encased now in a heavy fiberglass cast, rested on a slight elevation. The sight of the cast, a stark reminder of the violence inflicted upon his already vulnerable son, was a persistent, agonizing indictment of Marcus's own negligence. Shadow the Malinois remained the boy's anchor. He lay on a thick blanket by the bed, his amber eyes perpetually open, watching the hallway, the nurses, and especially Marcus himself with a quiet, unwavering suspicion. He was the only one in the room who did not look guilty. It was in this tense atmosphere that the professional help arrived. First came Helen Ward, the social worker assigned to high-profile child trauma cases. She was a woman in her late 40s, sturdy and sensible, with warm gray eyes set in a face etched with lines of empathy and realism. She wore practical, layered clothing, a thick wool cardigan over a sensible turtleneck and dark slacks, and carried a worn leather briefcase. Helen had a quiet, direct manner, honed by 2 decades of helping families navigate the wreckage of domestic crises. "Mr. Thorne, I've read the files. What you are feeling is self-reproach, not guilt," Helen stated, pulling a chair to the corner of the room, her voice a calm, low alto. "Guilt is what Vespertine will claim. You were deceived. Your job now is to dismantle the past and build a viable future." Then arrived Dr. Lewis Marks, the pediatric trauma therapist. He was a man in his early 60s, tall and slightly stooped, with the academic gravitas of a university professor, wearing a tweed jacket over his scrubs. Dr. Marks had a prominent, grizzled mustache and keen blue eyes that seemed to penetrate the surface of the conversation. His approach was famously gentle yet uncompromising, forcing patients and parents alike to confront the reality of their trauma. "Caspian is physically stable, Mr. Thorne," Dr. Marks began, his voice a gravelly, seasoned baritone, "but the psychological damage is immense. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was structural. His home was his cage. We need to reset his baseline. He needs ground zero, a place devoid of the ghosts of his old life, a place where wealth doesn't translate into danger." The words hit Marcus with the force of a physical blow. He had thought money could buy security. It had only bought a target. "Where?" Marcus finally asked, his voice rough from disuse. "Where can we go that is truly safe? I'm selling the Aspen house. I'm liquidating the entire Aspen portfolio. It's poison." Helen exchanged a knowing glance with Dr. Marks. "We have a concept, Mr. Thorne. It's radical, but often effective for trauma survivors. It's called geographic isolation and sensory reset. You need to move somewhere drastically different. Somewhere with natural isolation, a strong insular community, and the opposite sensory experience of cold, white mountain silence." "The Gulf Coast," Dr. Marks suggested, nodding. "Specifically, the Louisiana Bayou. Salt air, cypress trees, a different kind of quiet. A place with deep historical roots where money buys land, not access." Marcus felt a strange cold pull in his memory, a fleeting image of his deceased wife, Liliana, mentioning the bayou years ago. He dismissed it as a trick of his weary mind. The idea was absurd, but compelling. "Done," Marcus said, making the decision with the corporate finality he was known for. "We move as soon as he is cleared for travel." The final piece of the puzzle walked in an hour later. Officer Elena Rossi. She was off duty, wearing practical fleece layers and heavy snow boots, carrying 2 cups of steaming coffee. She looked tired, the exhaustion of the past 3 days heavy in her green eyes, but the determination remained. "Mr. Thorne, I came about Sarge," Rossi said, setting the coffee down. Marcus looked confused. "The police dog, is he injured?" "He is," Rossi confirmed, running a gloved hand through her auburn hair. "He strained a ligament in his front shoulder during the ascent, when he was pulling me up that final grade before the ridge. It's minor, but enough for the Mountain Patrol Board. They've made their decision. K9 Sarge is being medically retired." Marcus stared at the powerful dog, who was now resting his chin gently on Caspian's cast. Shadow, the Malinois, only lifted his head slightly, assessing the woman. Rossi continued, her voice softening. "Sarge is a high-drive dog. He won't do well in kennel retirement, and frankly, Mr. Thorne, the bond he's formed with Caspian is beyond routine. He saved your son's life, not just by alerting me, but by keeping Vespertine disoriented long enough for me to draw a weapon." She paused, her gaze direct and unblinking. "I can arrange the paperwork. He needs a stable home, a clear command structure, and purpose. And Caspian needs a hero. You need to take him. Sarge is yours, if you want him." Marcus looked at the powerful golden-coated dog, then at the unwavering sentinel, Shadow. He looked at his son, whose small hand had automatically reached out and nestled into Sarge's thick fur. The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the heart monitor. Marcus finally gave a slow, deliberate nod. His eyes, for the first time in days, showed a flicker of something other than despair, a protective, fiercely renewed purpose. I'll take him, both of them. They are family now. His decision was immediate and final. He called his head of security. The Aspen mansion, his old life, was to be stripped and sold. The destination, the Louisiana Bayou. Marcus felt a weight lift. He was trading his digital empire for manual labor and simple security. He was trading the cold, pretentious peaks of Aspen for the deep, swampy roots of the South. It was a leap of faith, a desperate maneuver, but it was the only direction left to run. The transition from the thin, biting cold of Aspen to the humid, suffocating embrace of the Louisiana Bayou was a shock to the system. The air here was heavy and sweet, smelling perpetually of dark water, decay, and blooming jasmine, a stark contrast to the sterile clarity of the mountains. Marcus had liquidated the Aspen estate with ruthless efficiency, leaving the mountain of betrayal behind him. He carried only his son, 2 loyal dogs, and a deep-seated, painful determination to rebuild from scratch. Their new sanctuary was a property Marcus had purchased sight unseen, based solely on its remoteness and the vague sense of destiny he felt in the hospital room. It was a weather-beaten cedar cabin on stilts, nestled deep in the Barataria Preserve, surrounded by thickets of cypress and Spanish moss that dripped like skeletal shrouds. The nearest neighbor was miles away. The structure was rustic, lacking the sophisticated security Marcus was accustomed to, but its sheer isolation felt like the only true shield left. Caspian, confined to a wheelchair while his severe fracture healed, seemed to thrive immediately in the damp warmth. He spent hours on the cabin's porch, his cast resting on a cushion, watching the slow green world unfold. He was always flanked by his 2 protectors, Shadow, the Malinois, vigilant and silent, patrolling the perimeter of the deck, and Sarge, the retired Canaan, calmer and more gentle, resting his heavy golden head on the boy's lap, his body providing constant, warm reassurance. The dogs, veterans of 2 different kinds of conflict, had quickly forged a silent, cooperative partnership. Marcus, stripped of his CEO identity, had replaced his charcoal suit with rough denim and a practical cotton shirt. His hands, once accustomed only to keypads and laser pointers, were now permanently stained with mud and paint. He had thrown himself into the daunting task of renovation, finding a raw, satisfying penance in manual labor. He was determined to make this remote cabin a fortress and a home. His primary contact in the bayou was Angus McTavish, the local jack-of-all-trades. Angus was a man nearing 60, thick-set and solid as an oak stump, with hands the size and texture of cured leather. His face was a roadmap of sun damage and hard living, framed by a thick, unruly mass of white hair and a close-cropped, grizzled beard. Angus had spent his entire life on the bayou, earning a reputation as a master carpenter, boat builder, and taciturn philosopher. He had lost his wife and son to the relentless Gulf decades ago, a grief that had made him fiercely protective of the fragility of human life and wary of the city outsiders. "You pay well, Thorne," Angus grunted on their first morning together, his voice a low, thick drawl characteristic of the region. "But this place, she's got deep roots, and she don't take kindly to city slickers who don't respect the water." "I respect it, Angus. I respect the quiet," Marcus replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "I just need your help rebuilding the old boathouse. It's rotting." "Boathouse is more than rot. It's half swallowed by the cypress," Angus observed, spitting a stream of tobacco juice precisely into the mud. He eyed Marcus's soft hands, and then the 2 distribulent dogs with an air of mild disapproval. "And you paid a mighty fine penny for this slice of swamp. Seems high, even for a city man hiding." Marcus ignored the barb, focusing on dismantling a section of the decaying wooden deck near the water's edge. The boathouse was the immediate focus. It served as the cabin's only substantial storage structure, leaning precariously over the murky water. It was late one afternoon, 3 weeks into the grueling renovation, that the discovery was made. The sun was setting, painting the water a bruised purple and orange, and the air was alive with the buzz of cicadas. Marcus was using a crowbar to pry loose the final, heavily waterlogged plank of the old pier, preparing to replace the substructure. Beneath the plank, nestled deep into the wet, dark earth and hidden by decades of mud and tangled roots, lay a small, heavy object. It was a wooden box, no larger than a cigar box, crafted from dark, dense swamp cedar, perfectly preserved by the lack of light and air. The wood was cold and smooth against Marcus's palm. "What is that?" Angus asked, stepping closer, his curiosity piqued. Marcus scraped the mud away with his thumb. The box was sealed, held shut by a single, intricate brass clasp. But it was the carving on the lid that stopped Marcus's heart. Etched into the dark cedar, worn smooth but still distinct, was the detailed, elegant outline of a fleur-de-lis, the stylized lily flower, a symbol deeply tied to French Louisiana heritage. Beside the lily, etched in a flowing, highly distinctive script, was a name that made the blood rush from Marcus's face. Liliana, Caspian's birth mother, the woman who had died tragically 6 years ago, whose memory Marcus had always associated with the sterile beauty of his first, perfect home in San Diego, not this wild, isolated swamp. "That's—" Marcus trailed off, his voice hollow. "That's my first wife's name, Liliana." Angus McTavish leaned in, his grizzled beard brushing against Marcus's shoulder as he examined the box. He took a long, slow drawl on his pipe, his eyes thoughtful. "The fleur-de-lis. That's old Bayou family carving, son. And this wood, this is old-growth cedar. Hasn't been used round here for 30 years, Angus observed. He pointed a thick finger at the script. "I recognize that hand. Used to see carvings like that 20 years ago, down in the coastal settlement before the big storm wiped it clean." Marcus looked from the box to Angus, his mind racing. The cabin, the inexplicable draw to this isolated piece of land. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Who was carving things like this 20 years ago?" Marcus demanded, his CEO intensity flaring back to life. Angus shrugged, his face of the landscape of cryptic silence. "Might have been the old keeper of the place, before the Harper family bought it. He was a fisherman, always carving things. Said he was saving this land for his own child. A sanctuary." Marcus tightened his grip on the box, the cedar rough against his palm. He felt a profound, chilling tremor of realization. This property, this isolated safe haven that he had chosen randomly in his despair, was somehow connected to Liliana. She had roots here. Could the choice of the bayou, the geographic reset suggested by the doctor, have been dictated by a fate far older and more carefully planned than his own crisis? He rushed back to the cabin, the 2 dogs following closely, leaving Angus standing alone beside the newly exposed pier substructure, the old man's face shaded in a knowing, quiet reflection. The scent of damp cedar and stale air filled the sparse living room of the bayou cabin as Marcus Thorne finally wrestled open the brass clasp of the mysterious wooden box. The moment felt heavy, charged not just with mystery, but with the painful, enduring memory of Liliana, his first wife. He sat at a battered, salvaged dining table, the 2 dogs, Shadow and Sarge, resting on the wooden floor nearby, their heads slightly raised, sensing the profound shift in the man's demeanor. Inside the box, Marcus found 2 items, perfectly preserved: a small leather-bound journal, its pages thin and brittle, and a faded photograph. Marcus first reached for the photograph. It was taken about 7 years ago, shortly before Caspian's birth and a year before Liliana's sudden passing. The image showed Liliana, radiant and smiling, standing in front of an old, weathered stone lighthouse. She was younger here, wearing a simple linen dress, her auburn hair loose and vibrant. Beside her stood an old man, tall and slender, with the deep-set eyes and thick, unruly white hair that was instantly recognizable as Angus McTavish. Marcus's hand trembled. The realization was a dizzying rush of cold air in the humid bayou heat. He looked at the photograph, then at the recent image of Angus, the local carpenter, currently working outside. Angus wasn't just a local, he was the old keeper of this very place, standing next to Liliana. He opened the journal. Liliana's handwriting, familiar and elegant, flowed across the first page. It wasn't a daily diary, but a series of focused, technical entries titled Project Lighthouse, Caspian Sanctuary. Marcus read, his corporate mind dissecting the entries, finally understanding the true, terrifying complexity of his first wife's final, desperate act of protection. Liliana had not died unexpectedly in the accident, as Marcus had always believed. Her entries, meticulously dated and signed, revealed that she had been privately battling a rapidly aggressive form of cancer, a secret she kept to spare Marcus and to prepare for the inevitable. But the journal revealed a far darker truth. Liliana had never trusted Vespertine, even during the early stages of their courtship. Entry 1. July 12th, 6 years ago. Vespertine's ambition has a cold, hungry glint. She sees Marcus's success, not him, but she sees Caspian as a liability, an obstacle to the primary inheritance. I must shield him, not just from the cancer that will take me, but from the greed that will surely follow. The journal detailed how Liliana, utilizing her own inherited wealth, a fortune Marcus was unaware of, separate from the Thorn Empire, and her deep family history in the Louisiana coast, had quietly purchased this abandoned bayou property years ago. It was known in her family as a fiefdom of the lilies, a generations-old sanctuary hidden from the world. Entry 14, August 29th, 5 years ago. I have legally structured the ownership of the property, the deed and soul. Final transfer of title are hidden within the trust's original documentation. It is designed to be released only upon a documented catastrophic destabilization of Caspian's primary guardianship, a condition that would ensure Marcus has hit rock bottom and needs an absolute escape. I pray he never needs it. I've entrusted Angus, my mother's cousin, with the key information. He will guide Marcus here, should fate require it. This swamp must be Caspian's ground zero. Marcus realized with a sickening clarity that the trust addendum that Vespertine had manipulated was not the real safeguard. It was a distraction. The core of Caspian's true protection was in the hidden deed tied to this property, a condition that Vespertine, in her focus on the larger liquid assets, had never discovered. Liliana, recognizing Vespertine's avarice, had used the main Thorn Trust as a decoy target, knowing Vespertine would be so preoccupied with the millions that she would overlook the existence of this simple, remote cabin, the true inheritance. The revelation was overwhelming. Liliana hadn't just prepared for her death. She had prepared for Vespertine's betrayal. She had orchestrated Marcus's final escape. The very random decision to move to the bayou, recommended by a doctor who had coincidentally been a friend of Liliana's family, was the final, devastating piece of Liliana's long-term plan. Marcus hadn't failed. He had been led here by a love that transcended the grave. He looked up, seeing Angus standing silently in the doorway, framed against the cypress shadows, a thick-set silhouette of silent witness. Angus's face, etched with decades of weather, held a look of profound, gentle sorrow and confirmation. "The deed, Mr. Thorn," Angus said, his voice low and respectful. "It's in the boathouse structure. I recognized the script on the box immediately. Liliana was a very determined woman. She swore me to silence, said you had to find the sanctuary yourself when the time was right." Marcus was unable to speak. He simply stood, walking out onto the porch, the heavy cedar box still in his hand. Suddenly, a sound broke the tension. Not a human voice, but the sharp, ecstatic bark of a dog. Caspian, confined to his wheelchair, was laughing, a full, clear sound that Marcus hadn't heard since before Liliana died. The boy was pointing across the yard, where Shadow and Sarge were playing a careful, clumsy game of chase. Sarge, the large, golden-coated canine, moved with a slight, manageable limp from his old injury, but he was fast. Shadow the Malinois ran a tight circle around them both, his movements precise and protective. Then, Caspian pushed himself up from the wheelchair. Tentatively, using the edge of the porch for balance, he put his weight on his good leg. Then, with a fierce, quiet concentration, he carefully lifted the foot encased in the fiberglass cast off the ground. He took one deep, shuddering breath, leaned forward, and took a single, deliberate step with his good leg, then another. He wasn't running, but he wasn't immobile. He was walking, a small, steady, unaided miracle of physical therapy and sheer will, driven by the freedom and safety of the bayou. He took 3 more steps, wobbling slightly. A profound triumph of movement after months of being tethered to aluminum and plastic. Marcus watched, tears finally stinging his eyes. His son was physically healing in the place his mother had intended. The betrayal of Vespertine was just the fire that had forged their path. The enduring love of Liliana was the light that had guided them home. The sanctuary was working. He walked to Caspian, dropping the wooden box onto the soft cushion of the wheelchair, and knelt down, pulling his son into a hug that communicated 6 years of unspoken guilt and gratitude. "We're home, Caspian. We're finally home." 1 year later, The humid air of the Louisiana bayou, once alien and oppressive, now felt like a second skin to the Thorne family. The weather-beaten cedar cabin, no longer precarious, stood strong and warm on its rebuilt pilings, a true sanctuary against the encroaching swamp. Marcus, his sharp CEO lines softened by sun and manual labor, stood on the newly expanded porch. He wore faded jeans and a simple cotton t-shirt, his hands calloused and his posture relaxed. The old fury against Vespertine had cooled into a focused, quiet resolve, fueled by the knowledge of Liliana's enduring love. Vespertine, stripped of her foundation's funds and social standing, was serving a long sentence for fraud and attempted murder, her legal appeals systematically dismantled by the overwhelming evidence Marcus had collected, evidence that included Liliana's carefully documented last wishes. The $50 million insurance payout was instead directed toward the primary Caspian Thorne Trust, now shielded by the ironclad legal terms Liliana had foreseen. Caspian, now 7, was a dramatically different child. The heavy fiberglass cast had been removed months ago, and through diligent physical therapy, often conducted on the uneven, resilient ground of the bayou, using the rebuilt deck railing for balance, his leg had gained surprising strength. He no longer relied on the aluminum crutch. He still favored his right leg slightly, but he moved with a quiet, confident speed, propelled by a sheer force of will and the boundless energy he drew from the environment. He emerged from the cabin now, no longer small and fragile, but lean and brown, carrying a fishing net. Shadow, the Malinois, moved silently beside him, his amber eyes perpetually fixed on the boy, serving as the quiet, watchful perimeter. Sarge, the large golden retriever Malinois mix, was slower but equally dedicated, his rhythmic slight limp from his retired injury making a comforting thump-thump as he trotted slightly behind, positioned to the right of Caspian, offering stability and companionship. The dogs were inseparable from the boy, a multi-layered shield of fur and loyalty. "Dad, Angus is here! He brought new cedar for the sign!" Caspian shouted, his voice clear and ringing, unrestrained by the fear that had once muffled him. He ran, a short, wobbly, but utterly free run, across the wooden porch, his brace long gone. Angus McTavish appeared, walking toward the cabin from the rebuilt pier. He wore clean, stiff denim overalls and a crisp white undershirt, his white hair neatly combed back beneath a worn leather cap. His face, still rugged, held a subtle contentment. He carried a fresh plank of cedar under one arm. "Morning, young Caspian," Angus greeted, his thick drawl warm. He nodded to Marcus. "Thought we'd better finish the sign today. The wind's turning." Marcus smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes for the first time in years. He realized he hadn't just changed locations, he had changed vocations. He now remotely managed a small portfolio of ethical tech investments, dedicating the bulk of his time to his family and the bayou. The focus of their work was the rebuilt boathouse and pier, a sturdy, beautiful structure now jutting confidently into the murky water. Marcus had taken the core of Liliana's hidden intentions, the property as a sanctuary, and expanded it. Using the newly protected funds from the trust, he had established the Liliana Thorne Foundation for Child and Canine Resilience, utilizing the remote cabin as its first quiet retreat center for families recovering from trauma. "Angus, I was reviewing the original blueprints you carved," Marcus said, gesturing toward the boathouse. The deed Liliana buried. It was clear she wanted the lighthouse restored, not just the boathouse. Angus nodded, his eyes meeting Marcus's with an understanding that transcended words. "That's why she named the project Lighthouse, son, not Swamp Cabin. The lighthouse, even if it's miles away, is the symbol. It's the guide." Marcus and Angus spent the afternoon carving the final plank of cedar. Marcus had retrieved Liliana's journal from the cedar box, now kept safely in a waterproof safe. He opened the last entry, which said, "The lighthouse is the heart. If you find this, Marcus, stop running, stop building walls, build light for Caspian. And for others who are lost, trust the bayou." As the sun began its spectacular, messy descent over the swamp, a fiery riot of reds, golds, and purples, they affixed the sign to the entrance of the new pier. The pier itself had been named by Caspian. Etched deeply into the bayou cedar, under the faint symbol of the fleur-de-lis, were the words, "Liliana's Unbroken Shore." Caspian, balanced effortlessly on the edge of the pier, watched the water, with an intense, peaceful focus. His leg, once a source of constant pain and limitation, was now strong enough to carry him. He turned, looking at his father, at Angus, and at his two loyal dogs. The past was a painful lesson, but the future was a tangible, golden horizon reflecting off the dark water. Marcus walked toward his son, his heart full. He had learned that true wealth was not measured in corporate valuation or glass towers, but in the simple act of protection that was first initiated by a woman who died of cancer, but whose love and foresight saved her son from a different, far more cynical death. He hadn't been lucky. He had been guided. He placed a calloused hand on Caspian's shoulder, looking out at the vast, silent bayou. "What are you thinking, buddy?" Caspian leaned into his father's touch, taking a deep breath of the damp, rich air. "I'm thinking Mom knew this place was strong, Dad. Strong enough to hold us." Sarge, the retired cane, let out a deep, contented sigh, settling his body against Caspian's newly strengthened leg, while Shadow, the Malinois, surveyed the thick shadows of the cypress trees, his eternal watch, unbroken. Marcus realized that the two dogs, sentinels of his old and new life, were the physical manifestation of the love that had guarded Caspian. His journey from the deceptive snow of Aspen to the enduring heat of the bayou had been long, but standing on this shore, he knew they had finally reached the safety Liliana had always intended. Their house was built not on steel and glass, but on cedar, loyalty, and the light of an enduring promise. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't come from a flash of light, but from a plan set in motion by an enduring, relentless love. This is the story of Caspian, who was saved not by luck, but by the foresight of a mother who saw the darkness coming and prepared a sanctuary in the wilderness. It reminds us that even when we feel abandoned and betrayed, we are often walking a path set by higher guidance, guided by the love of those we have lost. The true lighthouse is always the heart that never stops watching over us. If this story of perseverance, loyalty, and enduring love touched your heart, please type Liliana's Light in the comments to honor her memory. Hit the subscribe button to join our community and share this video to remind someone that hope is an unbreakable shore. May God bless you and your family, and may you always be guided back to your safe haven.